In this video, I'm going to talk about why I switched from Panasonic to Sony. Here's the story. In 2018, I started my video production company, Your Story Studios, and at the time I was shooting with the Panasonic AF100 and the Panasonic GH4. Now, at that time, the Panasonic AF100 was typically my A camera, even though it wasn't as well spec'd out as the GH4. And at the time, I found that the camera was starting to become unreliable. And when I say unreliable, when I tried to turn on the camera, it wouldn't power on. So if I turned up to a shoot and my camera wouldn't turn on, that wasn't good. So that was a pretty good excuse for me to look at upgrading my camera gear and getting something that was reliable, but also still professional. After doing some research, I limited the options for my purchases down to the Panasonic Eva-1 and the Canon C200. I ended up going with the Panasonic Eva-1, or Eva-1 as I affectionately call it, and I went with that camera out of compromise. At the time, I was looking for a camera that could shoot 4K 60p, 10-bit, internal, has built-in ND filters, had built-in XLRs, and ultimately looked like a professional video camera. I didn't really want to go down the mirrorless path or the DSLR path as my main camera. Having those cameras, they do serve their purpose and they are the right tool for specific types of jobs. But for me, as a video producer of a video production company, I didn't want to be turning up to sets with what looked like a photography camera to clients that might not be as well educated with what video production equipment can do and what it looks like. So in 2018, the Eva-1 was the perfect camera for me, even though it didn't have one massive feature that I was wishing it did have, and that was reliable, continuous autofocus. And that's why I was looking at the Canon C200 at the time as well. But the C200 only shot 8-bit internal video to SD cards, and I really wanted it to shoot 10-bit internal to SD cards. Yes, you can shoot RAW with the C200, but I wasn't interested in RAW. I wanted to shoot 10-bit to SD cards and not have to worry about massive file sizes for RAW and then all the post workflow and all that kind of stuff. So for me, 10-bit to internal SD cards was the solution. It was the best thing for my workflow, and that's what the Eva-1 offered. And another thing that I wish it had was, although it has internal NDs, I wish it had the variable electronic ND that Sony had at the time. So I purchased the Eva-1 out of compromise because at the time, that was the best camera for my needs at the time. I also ended up purchasing a Panasonic S1 as a B camera for my Eva-1, and that was my 2-camera setup for a bit over a year. Now in 2021, cameras have changed. They have progressed, and now we have so many different options that it is quite difficult to figure out what camera is best for me. And the thing is, what I'm saying today is what is best for me and not necessarily what's best for you, and that's okay. I'm just doing this video so you can hear about my journey, my story, and why I've gone from Panasonic to Sony. So now in 2021, I've done a pretty big swap. I've gone from shooting with Panasonic using EF and L mount lenses to shooting entirely on Sony cameras using E mount lenses. And here's why. One thing that I didn't really like about shooting with the Eva-1 and the Panasonic S1 was that they were two different camera mounts. You had the EF lenses on the Eva-1, and then you had the L mount lenses on the Panasonic S1. And yes, there are adapters that you can put on the S1 to let you use EF lenses, but ultimately I don't like using adapters because you don't get the best performance out of your lens. For me, I found it always a little bit slower, and I didn't like having that extra thing that I had to attach to the lens and then attach to the camera. I'd rather just have the lens to attach straight to the camera body. Also, the Eva-1 was a Super 35 sensor and the S1 was a full frame sensor. And when I'm doing 2-camera setups, I really wanted the cameras just to be able to line up as much as possible and look very similar. And I found that with a little bit of color correcting in post, you could get the images to look fairly similar. But as a video producer, I want things to be as simple and as easy as possible with my general workflow. So I don't always want to be thinking about, oh, how can I make this work for this situation? I just want my camera gear to work in as many situations as possible. And having a camera that shoots with an EF lens and then another camera that shoots with L-mount lenses meant that I needed more lenses, and that adds money, that adds extra gear that needs to come to set every single time, and I just wanted things to be simplified. So I ended up identifying Sony as being the camera system that really did work for my needs. It had the E-mount on the FX6 and the A7S III, which I'm recording myself with right now. So any E-mount lenses or full frame E-mount lenses will work on these full frame cameras, and I don't have to be thinking about crop factors and using adapters and all that kind of stuff. All the lenses that I'm purchasing, which are all full frame E-mount lenses, will work on both my cameras. And also with the Sony FX6, it has great reliable autofocus, and it also has the built-in electronic variable ND, which is really handy when you're shooting outside. Once you start shooting with an electronic variable ND outside, you'll never want to go back. What I love about the electronic variable ND is that you can just dial in your settings. So you set your f-stop, you can set your ISO, and then if you're shooting outside and the sun comes out, then the variable ND will smoothly adjust your image and make sure that you don't go overexposed and the exposure stays how you want it. And then if the sun goes behind a cloud, then it will then change the variable ND to make sure that your image is still exposed the way it should. So overall, I'm really happy switching over to the Sony FX6 and the A7S Mark III, and I'm looking forward to showing you guys some of the projects that I shoot in the future using these cameras.